thank all of you for bearing some tough weather conditions to come out today. We have a number of challenges and opportunities that certainly I'll try to touch on here today. But Rick Schwartz's father gave me some fatherly advice before I came up here. He said, "Buis, you know you're the only thing stopping us from lunch, so make it short." So I will. I want to congratulate both Rick and certainly Steve and Monty and Lucy and everyone that works for the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association, all its members, all your guests here today. We're a great industry, and we're a great industry that's going to succeed. And it takes all of us rowing in the same direction to make to meet the necessary challenges and opportunities. I also want to commend the governor and the lieutenant governor and certainly Leonard Boswell. I've been in Washington a long time, and I don't think I have ever seen anyone as committed to doing what's right for rural America and for the next generation of fuels, the current generation of fuels, than Leonard Boswell. Give him another round of applause. But really, the treat is mine to come out here because, as Steve said, I've been in Washington quite some time. And I've always kept the feeling that if you want to really know what's going on, you got to get out and talk to the people that actually participate in the industry. Anyone from Washington that comes out and says they necessarily know what's best for you, I always say, hold on to your wallet and your watch. And there's probably no better quote that I'm fond of telling than one by President Eisenhower, who once said, "Farming is mighty easy when your plow's a pencil and you're 1,000 miles from the nearest cornfield." And there's a lot of pencil plowers in Washington. They're smart people. It doesn't mean they've got some wrong agenda, but they really don't understand what you do, how you do it, and all the benefits. They often get the information in little bitty snippets, and they get the wrong information in little snippets as well. And so being engaged, listening to the people, and taking that back to Washington is really valuable, and only you can do that. I think, as Leonard would tell you, or any of your elected officials, and you got a great delegation from Iowa that's very supportive of everything we do, they'll tell you that when a constituent walks into that office and you can put a face with that issue, that's very important to them because they represent you. And don't ever lose sight of that. So any chance you can, whether it's here at the state level or on the federal level, weigh in. Your opinion does matter. I represent Growth Energy, as Steve said. We formed just about 4 years ago. We now have 80 members, 150 associate members, 50,000 what we call grassroots growth force supporters. And our goal is to ensure the viability of our industry, to ensure it grows. One of the first actions we took when we were formed was to file almost 4 years ago, it'll be 4 years ago exactly next month, the waiver, which we called the Green Jobs Waiver Act, with the Environmental Protection Agency, and to allow up to E15 into the marketplace. We knew there was a blend wall coming. We could all see it. You do 10% of the fuel consumption, and it pretty well tells it. At that time, we were running around 140 billion gallons annually of consumption. Today, that number is down significantly, and I'm sure you heard at the first panel. We're projected probably about 130 billion gallons annually, which 10% of that is 13 billion gallons. But since we reformed, one of the big issues, and this one is particularly troubling for me, I think, as Steve said, I was president of the National Farmers Union. I love representing agriculture. I farmed. I grew up on a farm. I farmed full-time for 20 years. I still own a farm. And one of the biggest challenges that we've always faced in rural America was, how do you get profitability to those people actually producing it? And for decades we went through this period where We were basically counting on government programs to get us by. We didn't have a free market. We didn't have competition. In fact, we had consolidation within the industries that actually buy our products until the American ethanol industry came along. And at first, we were the darlings of everyone. Everybody loved ethanol. But we weren't producing very much. And when the RFS was passed in 2005, and then reauthorized in 2007, and the industry expanded, guess what? We had almost 200 new buyers of commodities. You get supply and demand into balance, and suddenly farmers started making a profit from the marketplace. And every farmer or rancher or person from rural America that I've ever met, they've always said, I just wish I could get a profit from the marketplace. And it finally happened, and it happened because of you. And that's when the guns came out in 2008. And the big campaign, it was a well-funded, multi-million-dollar campaign by the Grocery Manufacturers Association of America, came up with this catchy phrase called food versus fuel. Food versus fuel. It's the biggest lie that I've ever heard in Washington, D.C. in my 25 plus years there. And trust me, in that time period, I've heard a few whoppers out there. But it was not based on facts. It was catchy, and it stuck. And one of the reasons it stuck was our opponents had the resources to go out and make it stick, and our industry was still struggling with, well, how do you oppose it? That's not true. We know it's not true. We talk about it amongst ourselves all the time. Well, we have to get out and challenge that on an equal basis. And that's one of the things that we've spent a lot of time over the last few years, and we were making progress. We were making serious progress. Most of the economic analysis shows we weren't the reason that prices went up in 2008. The big reason, it was ironically energy prices that drove up food prices. We weren't the reason, but we still got the blame. And we were one crop, and we're still one good crop away from finally putting that issue to bed. Unfortunately, we all know what happened this year, and so it's stuck in 08, and it's back in 2012 and 2013. But, everybody didn't share in our elation of the success of this industry and the growth. Big oil saw it as a market threat. Big food certainly saw it as changing the market dynamics where they no longer could buy those commodities that America's farmers work so hard to produce annually at below cost of production and count on the government to subsidize the farmer. It was a pass-through. Big Enviro didn't like this stuff because it wasn't a fancy new shiny ball in the air, and it involved agriculture, and some people have this misguided view that all agriculture is bad, or as a friend of mine that just left as governor of Montana once said, he said, some people think our entire fuel, food, and fiber policy should be we go naked, live in trees, and eat nuts. And we have to be realistic about this stuff and what we do and how we do it. So we got to get our message out there. And when the guns came out, and I used to do this top 10 thing, I won't go through them all ad nauseum, kind of like a Dave Letterman thing of all the criticisms that we faced that were false. They blamed us in 2008 for higher toothpaste prices because farmers were using more phosphate, and it was driving up the cost of phosphate for the Crest and some of those companies. They blamed us for pasta riots in Italy. Well, anyone knows anything about pasta, it's made from durum wheat. Durum wheat in the United States is grown in that microclimate up along the Canadian border. This wasn't traditional corn ground. Nice try. They blamed us for higher movie prices, of all things, because we drove up, the ethanol industry drove up the price of popcorn. Well, I'm from Indiana, and we produce some popcorn in Indiana, and actually have grown some on our farm before. And so we did a little investigation. I was Farmers Union at the time. We found out that the movie theater chains pay more for the container that they put the popcorn in than they did the popcorn. And besides, we don't produce ethanol out of popcorn. That's a totally different product. We got hit for higher beer prices. I mean, these guys were going for the heart and soul of everyone. Well, again, from my experience in Indiana, we know something about making hard liquor or whiskey out of number 2 yellow corn, but we don't make beer out of number 2 yellow corn. We got blamed, obviously, for food shortages in 2008. The food shortages were a result of less than normal rice production and wheat production. Had nothing to do with corn, but it was our fault. We got blamed for tortilla shortages in Mexico. Well, tortillas are primarily made out of white corn. And at that time, as NAFTA was still kicking in, the United States was prevented from sending more than 2% of Mexico's white corn supply into that country. So again, nice try. And the one they forgot to blame us for that year, and we were waiting on this, and I knew that it was going to come, was they were going to have to cancel Halloween because there was a candy corn shortage. What was all missed in all this debate were the facts. And it's this big one-sided push with millions of dollars of resources to paint us with every negative possible. And us and others have really worked hard to overcome that. We're hoping for a good rainfall this year. Last year, the crops came up good stands everywhere. And it wasn't the RFS that drove the prices up. Common sense will tell you. It was Mother Nature. We had excessive heat and a lack of rainfall. And do you know, by the end of the day, and you could never have guessed that by what went on last summer, but by the end of the day, the sky didn't fall. Market's correct. The ethanol industry reduced production. Exports, as price gets so high, exports are often for bargain basement buyers that can't find a better deal elsewhere. Export markets adjusted. We still had the 8th biggest corn crop in our history, and prices came down. They've been running in the $7 range, not that $10 or $12 range that everyone said they were going to go to. But the other big issue that we face, and seriously, the food versus fuel issue is still one big hurdle for us. We have to overcome it. But the other big issue is the RFS and the blend wall. And the RFS and the blend wall are connected at the hip. Oil, I think, was shocked. I don't know how many of you have ever been to a dog race, but they have a mechanical rabbit, and they can control the speed of that rabbit. And they have the dogs. And they want the dogs to chase the rabbit. They never let the dogs catch the rabbit. The corn ethanol industry, or the grain ethanol industry, literally caught the rabbit. In 2005 and 2007, I don't think anyone would have predicted that we could produce as much and ramp up production as quickly as we did and be able to get up to that blend wall as fast as we did. We caught the rabbit. We caught people by surprise. And I think those who are vested in the status quo of our nation's fuel supply suddenly woke up and said, whoa, these guys are good. If they can get up to potential of 15 billion gallons in that short a period of time, then they're most likely to be able to meet the goals of the RFS, which is 36 billion gallons by 2022. We got to stop them. And so what did they do? They've spent the last 4 years spending millions of dollars in erecting every regulatory and legal roadblock possible to get E15 into the marketplace. Everything. Some of them are almost too funny to even mention. I mean, we even had a regulatory hurdle, which we think we've got worked out now, and soon there'll be something coming out, that you got to buy a minimum of 4 gallons of gasoline when you pull up to a pump that dispenses anything higher if that hose dispenses anything higher than E10. I don't know where this came from. There's about a third of a gallon that remains in the hose when you shut it off. And the fear was someone was going to come in there with their gallon jug and get a third of a gallon would be E15 as opposed to E10. They'd go home and put it in probably their Chinese-made weed eater, and it would conk out and the sky would fall, and that's misfueling. Well, all these, and they're too numerous to mention, but we have faced this kind of stuff for 4 years. It's like going to the county fair and putting your money down to play that game whack-a-mole. We'd get one put down and 6 more would pop up. And our opposition is good, and they're good at erecting it. On the legal front, they've sued EPA, autos, fuel, or oil, refiners, big food, big chicken, big Viro, everybody joined together and sued EPA over the waiver, granting the E15 waiver. We intervened. Growth Energy was the only group to intervene on behalf of EPA. And so as we went to court, our lawyers and their lawyers started communicating, and they said, we're only going to defend the merits of the waiver decision, that they have the authority to be able to do it in this particular manner, and they've got the science to back up, da-da-da-da-da. Fine, we said. Our team, Growth Energy's legal team, came up with a strategy. Let's challenge the standing of these groups to even bring the lawsuit. We couldn't convince Department of Justice or EPA to go along with us, so we were kind of out there by ourselves. We go to trial, and trust me, hundreds of thousands of dollars later in preparing all these briefs, we took the gamble, we took the risk to challenge this. And last August, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled 2-1, threw the court case out on the basis of the standing. That was huge. So all our critics' options at that point was, okay, what are we going to do? They could appeal what's called to the full D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, all the judges, for a rehearing. Well, that process took until last week or maybe the week before, and the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals refused to rehear the case. That's a huge win for us because there's a lot of people, when they're in the retail industry or wherever, saying, well, we're not sure this is going to be a legal fuel. Now, Big Oil still has an option, and that option is to petition the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court gets 8,000 cases a year, requests to hear 8,000 cases. They hear about 80 of those. So they're swimming uphill for a change, and that's a huge development as we continue to work towards getting E15 into the marketplace. Oil's got it figured out. You don't break the blend wall. The support for RFS on Capitol Hill goes away because they can walk into those offices just as we walk into those offices, and they can say, guess what? You can't put a size 12 foot in a size 6 shoe. 36 billion gallons of renewable fuels when you only have a market of 10% because of the blend wall doesn't work. So let's get rid of the program. And that's exactly what they're doing. You probably read all the press. Every week it's a new attack. Yesterday was a brand new one. It was based on a cherry-picked unscientific study they did previously last May. They fed upon it, and now they're going after the fuel pumps as they're going to fail, all this stuff. You know, he who pays the piper calls the tune. This is an oil-funded study again. Even the court, the District Court of Washington, D.C. ruled that these people don't have any standing. They can't prove any engine damage. They can't prove emissions damage. They don't have the data. But they're trying to make Congress and everyone else feel like they do. They got AAA to go along. AAA just used oil as regurgitated studies. They weren't objective. So these challenges are going to continue. And even last week, Big Chicken came out, and they're blaming us for shorting people chicken wings at the Super Bowl. This stuff is almost ridiculous. And oh, by the way, their production's only down 1%. But they're desperate, and they're not going to stop. And so what are we doing on it? And how are we going to accomplish our goals and fight back? Well, for a long time, and many of you in this room know this, a lot of people are involved in the biofuels, whether it's current generation, next generation, umpteenth generation, other alternatives, drop-ins, butanol, algae, cellulose, you name it. And oftentimes what was happening was the representatives of those groups were kind of trying to go on their own. Everybody got in the silo. Sometimes they wanted to cannibalize it, like some of these advanced bio drop-in guys, they wanted our VTech to fund their program. And so oil's sitting back there laughing all the way at the bank. We've divided these guys, and we're going to conquer them. They're fighting amongst themselves. And I don't know how many times I went to those groups and said, learn from our industry. Learn from the first generation ethanol industry. We were the darlings of everyone until we started to become a market threat, and then the guns came out. And that's exactly what's going to happen to each and every one of you. And guess what? This past summer, the Department of Defense and the U.S. Navy came out with actual trials of biofuels in the part of the Navy fleet. In these exercises they conduct in the Pacific Ocean. They powered destroyers, they powered F-18 Hornet jets, all from this. And oil got their buddies in Congress, and Leonard Boswell can attest to this. They passed a provision in the Defense Authorization Bill that prevents U.S. or Department of Defense from spending any more on testing any type of fuel than what they're currently paying for their diesel or their jet fuel. And I think people woke up. Suddenly these groups said, well, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. These guys are going to go after us once you become a serious threat to their business. So we obviously were more successful in getting people's attention about putting together a broad coalition. And there are a lot of people talking about, well, let's get these groups and let's get these groups. And there were about 5 different efforts out there to coalesce. And our point was, why don't we all get together in one? And we did. And we sent around requests for proposals from all the top communications firms in the country, in Washington, D.C. And we listened to these people explain what we need to do and how we need to get our message out to protect the RFS and to scale the blend wall. We came up with the group called Fuels America. We selected, ironically, and this one threw everybody for a loop, we selected the firm that had the best proposal by and far and away, but it happened to be the same communications firm that worked for Grocery Manufacturers Association that came up with food versus fuel. And it's like hiring a lawyer or accountant or anyone else. It's not about their philosophy. These people work to accomplish their goals. They're communications people. They know how to push a message out. So Clover Park got the contract. We created this Fuels America. It's being funded from a number of people from various entities, Growth Energy, RFA, certainly Bio, DuPont, Poet, Abengoa, and others. But we got to broaden it out. It's called Fuels America. You're going to probably hear a lot more about it. There's different levels people can participate in. We want to bring in suppliers. We want to bring in everyone to help defend this RFS. We're all working together on Capitol Hill. We're doing joint meetings. ACE is a part of it. I forgot to mention, I think Brian Jennings is out here. Corn Growers is part of it. We've worked really hard to try to keep people playing fair in the sandbox so that we're not divided, because at the end of the day, we have the political constituency far greater than oil. And a lot of people say to me, well, ethanol's got a negative connotation. Well, maybe so, but we're a hell of a lot more popular than big oil. And so when we start drawing these comparisons, when we start talking about what they do to the environment, what they do to our economy, every recession over the last 40 years has been preceded by high gasoline prices. We start talking about the trillions of dollars that we've sent to other countries for our addiction to foreign oil. And when we start talking about the trillions of dollars we've spent in a couple of wars, in defending those shipping lanes so that foreign oil can reach our shores, when we start talking about who has tax credits and who doesn't, our industry came together and voluntarily gave up the VTEC, the tax credit. We're waiting, and I hope you guys send this message loud and clear. It's time for big oil to do the same. We have a deficit problem in the country. They should be paying their fair share of taxes. They're a far more mature industry than we are. They've been around a lot longer. And if you read any of their SEC filings, I think they're doing pretty well. So let's have a level playing field across this effort. The other thing we're doing, and many of you know this, a few years ago, we all started talking to NASCAR. NASCAR have been using unleaded gasoline, and only for a couple of years had they switched from leaded gasoline. And we wanted to get them to switch over and using ethanol. And we put together this partnership with the corn growers, and our friend Craig Floss out there has been very instrumental in this with the Iowa corn growers. And we put together this thing called American Ethanol. We're not trying to go out there and brand it as Growth Energy or National Corn or this group or that group. We want to help the whole industry. And what you have to keep in mind is if we scale that blend wall with E15, guess what? It's voluntary. You got to have consumers that want it to be able to entice that retailer to want to offer it. And if we don't get out there and start marketing, then we're going to sit here and watch all these attacks as we don't get the blend wall, and people say you failed. So the NASCAR effort was really important because they switched their top 3 series to E15. And we did that for a reason, because we want to market E15. Again, we don't have a branded product, but we do have this blend level out there that we want to push consumers towards. NASCAR reaches 1 in 4 adults. It's the cheapest form of advertising to that many people that you can get. They have now, after two full seasons of racing, they put over 3 million miles on those cars in the toughest conditions possible. I don't know, 10,000, 11,000 RPMs, 4 hours at a time out there. High horsepower, tough conditions, right? And guess what? They haven't had a single problem with ethanol. Not one. The mechanics, the engineers, the team owners, the drivers, all swear by it. They say it's a great product. It's a better performing fuel. But nobody knows that. We sometimes talk about, and I'll try to be brief because I know everybody's hungry. We try sometimes talk to ourselves, and we talk in our own language. And a couple of years ago, an idled ethanol plant about a mile from one of the farms that I own reopened. And they asked me to come out for the grand opening. And normally when I go out there, I get a chance to get out of Washington, especially in Indiana. I want to go by the farm and check on things and check to see if my brothers are doing it the way they should be, although they'll have a different story about that. Check with my relatives. I didn't have time, so one of my brothers, my 2 brothers' farm, picked me up at the airport, took me to the speech, and on the way back, he said, I hear you talking about blender pumps. He says, does that mean I can go get me a margarita or a milkshake while I fill up my truck? And I thought, boy, thank you, Captain Obvious. We don't connect with the consumer. And what do most consumers think of when a blender? They don't think of a pump that offers options. So I was telling the story to our board a couple days later, and we just started, for lack of a better name, calling them flex pumps, because it gives flexibility. But if you stop and think about it, and you really analyze it, we named our product after a molecule. And a lot of people, in our polling shows us, they don't know what ethanol is. We named our next generation product after another molecule, cellulose. We named our co-product DDGs, which sounds like a drug or a disease, like maybe you ought to go to the doctor. We have to start thinking in terms of marketing and connecting with consumers. That's our strength. We're not going to be able to outspend our critics. There's no way. API, American Petroleum Institute, for example, their communications budget is $66 million a year. That's one of them. You got the refiner groups, you got the individual companies, you watch their ads on TV. They sound like us, like they're better for the environment, better jobs, all the stuff that we use. So it's a difficult situation. Briefly, we have other challenges besides the blend wall, the RFS, and the food versus fuel stuff. In California, we're still fighting legally with the Air Resources Board out there over their low carbon fuel standard, which unfairly penalizes U.S. ethanol grown out or produced outside the state of California from entering the market. We won the court case on the district level, and it's now under appeal by CARB to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. It's all been briefed up, the oral arguments have been heard, and we're waiting for the next step there. The 2013 volume levels, everyone is waiting to hear what those are going to be, and this is critical. This is critical for a couple of reasons. One, oil does a really good job of going to Capitol Hill and saying, why are we having to pay a penalty for fuel that's not being produced? They won a narrow case last week in court on that, on the cellulosic number. But every gallon of cellulose that's not produced from that target of 1 billion gallons, and I think they're estimating there might be 10 million gallons this year, that 990 million drops over into the overall advanced biofuel bucket, which includes our friends from biodiesel. It includes our not-so-good friends from Brazil, because sugarcane ethanol qualifies as an advance. And if that bucket doesn't get filled, well, what happened last year is it didn't get filled by domestic production, and we had a flood of imports come in from Brazil. Totally depressed the market, our market. It's been as tough an economic time for as long as this industry has been around. And that's a huge issue, so watch for that decision as it comes down the road. We work on rail issues. You know, they're wanting to redo the rail cars into the future and retrofit the old ones. We're getting challenged on water use again, which is ironic because if you look at this industry, we continue to use less water, not more water, and our competition can't say the same. Look at all they have to do when they go to fracking and high-intensity oil drilling. We got the indirect land use challenge issue still. You know, that was the most bizarre concept ever created by people that didn't know what they were talking about but knew what they wanted to achieve, and that was to put a dagger in the back of our industry and blame us for what other countries doing. Come on. Made no sense. We still work on it. We've got the challenge of new pathways. Recently, EPA granted a indirect land use number for grain sorghum, and some plants have filed for pathways where sorghum-produced ethanol will qualify as an advanced biofuel. Corn can't because our critics stuck in that '07 law, a provision called the Corn Discrimination Law, which prevents cornstarch ethanol from qualifying as an advanced biofuel, even if we meet the greenhouse gas emissions definition of 50%. Made no sense then, makes no sense today. We got to continue to defend the industry, and we got to send that message out there, and it's pretty simple. We got to tell the good things that we do. You know, we create over $50 billion in GDP, 400,000 direct and indirect jobs, 60% less greenhouse gas emissions unless you make up some bizarre indirect land use change. Consumer savings at the pump up to $1 a gallon, depends on the market prices. Our national security. You know, here we are, we're trying to figure out, and have for several years, how to unwind ourselves from 2 wars in the Middle East. 2 wars. And the thousands of our brave soldiers that have lost their lives or been maimed is inexcusable over our addiction to oil. I had the opportunity to go with Richard Childress and Brian France from NASCAR last 2 years, out to Walter Reed Hospital. And it's the most sobering experience, but it's also very enlightening of these brave soldiers that have lost limbs, many of them multiple limbs, and how they are being rehabilitated in their will to succeed. We shouldn't be going through that for oil. We've got alternatives. And we got to go, again, as I said, on the offensive. You know, just this week, oil had another spill. Mississippi River. Barge hit the bridge or something. It's spilling oil in there. You don't see any beaches closed because of ethanol spills. Matter of fact, if an ethanol freighter or tanker went down, probably the only consequences would be some happy fish for a couple of days. We don't damage the environment. There have been no wars fought over ethanol. We don't hire or use our soldiers or our Navy to protect our shipping lanes. We've got the advantages. We're not subsidized. We get no tax credits. Oil has a mandate. They like talk about our mandate of the RFS. Oh, you got to get rid of this mandate. That's quite a mantra in Washington, as Leonard Boswell will tell you. Oh, mandate's a dirty word. Oil has a 90% mandate that 90% of the fuel that you use has to come from oil. Think about it. As long as that blend wall is there, it's a mandate for them, and they don't want to change it. And let's get the facts out there. Let's go on the offensive. General Wesley Clark is co-chair of Growth Energy, retired 4-star general and Supreme Allied Commander in NATO, and he said, you don't win wars on the defensive. You got to win on the offensive. And each and every one of you understand it, and we got the right story to tell. Let's go out and do it. But keep this in mind. We can challenge our critics, or we can give up. And I don't think anyone here is willing to give up. Is anyone willing to give up? I see no hands. So we have to go out and fight. And as Winston Churchill said in World War II, in some of the darkest hours of the bombings of London, never give up, never give up, never give up. I'm standing here today, we'll never give up. We're going to win this fight. Thank you.
Do we have some questions?
Good morning, Tom. This is Jerry Calise. And with your connections in Washington, I would like to get your perspective of the new farm bill that they're working on, and will there be a renewable fuels component for it? And alternatively, if we don't have a renewable fuels portion in the farm bill, how long do you think it'll be before we'll have a farmer-owned reserve again?
Good questions. You know, Jerry, I learned a long time ago that I never make a prediction for Congress because I'll probably end up with egg on my face. But as Congressman Boswell knows, and Undersecretary of Agriculture Dallas Townsagger knows, the Farm Bill has been really frustrating, very frustrating. It expired last September the 30th. And many of the programs that were, and while they extended it for a 9-month period after the first of the year, they only extended about half of it, basically, because there's no money, there's no funding for those vital energy programs that are contained in the Farm Bill. And I'm sure Dallas will probably touch on that stuff. But the REAP program, the BCAP program, the Biorefinery Assistance Program, there's no money. Now, there's an option to go to the appropriations process and try to get funding for that, but I have to tell you, that's a tough battle. In my opinion, you know, the appropriators ought to fund the programs, and to pay for it, make big oil pay their fair shares of taxes, and probably even help with the deficit on that. But it remains to be seen. You know, absent a farm bill, though, everybody in this room that farms better hope and pray that the ethanol industry remains vibrant. We're the difference between massive surpluses building up and by increasing our domestic demand. And if you don't have the protection of the Farm Bill, and you don't have a market, and you start getting 2 billion, 3 billion bushels of carryover, and one day we're going to have good weather, I promise. I haven't talked to Mother Nature lately, but I promise we're going to have it. And it could be this year. And with the amount of acreage and the potential yield that we can do on these crops, we have to have a marketplace for that. And shame on Congress. I'll exclude you, Leonard, but shame on the leadership in the House for not passing the Farm Bill before now. Everybody wants certainty. You can deal with programs that you may not like or issues that you may not like if you're certain that's what you're facing. Right now, nobody knows what they're facing. And until they do that Farm Bill, they won't. Jerry?
I just want to encourage folks, we are going to go ahead and do one more speaker as the schedule calls for before lunch. It's a very interesting speaker. I really encourage you to stay here. Then we're going to take a little bit of a late lunch and come back a little bit late after lunch. So let's have another round of applause for Tom Buis.
Thank you. And thank you, Monty.